Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, August 21st, 2013, middle of the week hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another crazy weekend, emphasis on crazy. And, of course, we're just coming up here on the Labor Day holiday, which is sort of the sociological end of summer, and another opportunity for yet another false flag attack. And speaking of false flag, obviously the top story is it appears that the government has gone ahead with the plan they were talking about earlier this year to stage a chemical attack in Syria against civilians and blame Assad for it. And that's going to be our top story here. But first of all, our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Little program note, tomorrow in our third hour, our guest will be Dr. Kevin Barrett, who is one of the organizers and promoters of the Million Muslim March that's going to take place on the anniversary of 9/11. And I've been trading emails with him about the potential for this to be targeted by agent provocateurs, and he's well aware of that risk. But he's going to be on our show talking about how this is intended to be a very, very peaceful march. They are on guard, looking for infiltrators and agent provocateurs to try and cause violence, but they're going to go ahead with this anyway. Now, we woke up this morning with news that there had been a dastardly chemical weapons attack that targeted children in Syria. Oh, yes, let's make sure we target the children and get their bodies on TV to maximize the emotional impact so that we can demonize the evil Assad and launch the war. And they're constantly replaying Obama's speech about how use of chemical weapons will be a game changer. They're already selling the idea that this chemical weapon attack is going to signal the start of a direct U.S. invasion into Syria because their covert attempt at a coup d'etat through these hired mercenaries has pretty much cratered. Assad is on the verge of taking back his country from these hired mercenaries. And because the United States cannot be seen to lose a war without losing the momentum of their ultimate aim of conquering all of these nations, including Iran, they're basically ginning up this very thin and pathetic excuse to justify a direct military intervention. Now, remember, earlier this year, there were leaked emails that revealed there was a plan approved by the Obama White House to use chemical weapons on the Syrian civilians and frame Assad for it. So we know they were talking about doing this all the way back in January. And don't forget, some of the captured hired mercenaries were found to be in possession of chemical weapons that bore manufacturing labels from companies here in the United States of America. Russia Today was reporting on how the hired mercenaries were getting these chemical weapons through Turkey, which, by the way, is out there at the forefront of screaming, oh, yes, it's Assad. Really, it's Assad. And let me ask you a question. Assad has been begging the United Nations for months to send in their own team of chemical weapons investigators to look into the previous chemical weapon attack and determine for themselves whether it was something done by the Syrian government or more likely by the hired mercenaries attempting to frame him. And so what do you really think Assad would be so stupid on the day the UN team finally arrives to launch a major chemical attack against civilians just a couple of miles from where those UN investigators are staying? If you think Assad is that stupid, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. And I'm not the only one who's saying this is an obvious false flag. We're hearing from, like, the 21st Century Wire, evidence does not add up. The timing is suspect because of the presence of the UN investigators. We're seeing another story over at RINF.com. Even the impartial experts are saying this has to be a false flag. It just doesn't make sense. Obama is desperate for a new distraction to take the heat off of Floodgate, and nothing distracts the American people like more blood, gore, and spectacular explosions. And so it looks like he's pushed the green light on invading Syria, and they say, we'll just gas the people, blame it on Assad, and we're off there and running. And nobody's buying this. Russia has already come out with statements saying that they are convinced this latest chemical attack was carried out by the rebels as a deliberate provocation to get a direct U.S. military intervention. The Russian Foreign Ministry is out there with a statement saying this has all the earmarks of a pre-planned and staged provocation. Because they were catching earlier on how the propaganda about chemical weapons in Syria was starting to ramp up. Remember when the U.S. government or Israel does one of these pre-planned false flag operations, they pre-sell it with propaganda in the media. Been hearing for the last several weeks, terror, 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 chemical weapons in Syria. Saw the same thing just before 9/11, where the American corporate media was just flooded nonstop with Osama bin Laden, what an evil bad guy he is, he's terrible, you should hate him. And at that time, bin Laden hadn't actually really done anything that was worth that kind of nonstop total saturation media control. And it was so obvious and heavy-handed that I actually commented on it over at Free Republic, where I was still welcome to post. And I got attacked, and, oh, you're a kook, and then I got banned from Free Republic, which was okay because it made me go back and spend more time on my own website. So nobody's buying this. But it feels like the U.S. government's official position is going to be, we don't care if the rest of the world thinks we did it. Our official position is Assad did it, and the war is on. So that seems to be what they're going to go. And they're just hoping that you, the American people, are stupid enough or intimidated enough to just go along and say, well, yeah, okay, you can have my kid to invade Syria with, and I won't say anything bad about it. And the situation is deteriorating all over that part of the world. Apparently there is a flood of refugees from Syria into Iraq's Kurdistan. And the Iraqi government is very, very concerned about that. They may actually decide that's grounds to intervene in Iraq's Kurdistan, which is supposed to be a semi-autonomous region. The Kurds want their own country. They've been calling for that for years, and so it looks like that's going to go up. Now, over in Egypt, as the bloodbath continues there, in this coup d'etat that took Morsi from power, which Turkey's Erdogan says is an Israeli operation, which is why Israel's screaming at the U.S., no, you got to go on giving money to the new government. Apparently that new Egyptian government that claims to represent the will of the Egyptian people to get rid of Morsi has just freed Hosni Mubarak from jail. Now, that's a real head-scratcher, unless you view this from the context of being an obvious counter-revolution to get rid of that whole democracy thing and put back a tyrant in power. And already out in Las Vegas, the bookies are taking bets on whether Mubarak is going to get his old job back. Now, over in Iran, they're teaching school children something actually kind of useful, as opposed to the United States, which is just filling our kids' heads with nonsense, if you're listening to that Phyllis Schlafly report. And apparently Iranian school kids are learning drone hunting skills. And it's rather terrible when the children of the country have to get involved in the preparations for war. But you need to understand, those drones are not invulnerable. They're very lightweight. They're very fragile. They can actually be brought down a lot more easily than you might think from watching them on TV and movies. In fact, I'm going to be talking about the flight characteristics of drones a little bit later in the show here. And so the Iranian children are being trained to spot drones so that they can be intercepted and brought down. Over in Indian Kashmir, the young people there are so fed up with how their government has mishandled their country, they're starting to form militant groups, potentially armed. I mean, the whole place is getting ready to blow up. And that's just what the money junkies love. Oh, more war, more blood, more debt. We'll be rich. Trading blood for gold. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, we're coming up in a few weeks on another anniversary of 9/11. And already the no plane at the Pentagon people are out there trying to poison the well. They're trying to get as many websites and blogs to sign on to this nonsense. And if they can get everybody to sign on to it, Then they'll release one of these confiscated videos that unambiguously shows the 757 slamming into the Pentagon in order to say, look, those kooks, all this time they've been saying there was no plane, and here it is. You shouldn't listen to anything those 9/11 truthers have to say. And, of course, the thorn in the side is that pretty much all of the 9/11 truth movement recognize it's a poison the well tactic, because we understand and recognize how the propaganda game works. And it's rather amazing. We just updated some of our Pentagon pages at whatreallyhappened.com, including more photos of recognizable aircraft wreckage at the Pentagon. And still I get emails saying, I can't see any wreckage at the Pentagon. I am not convinced. I dare you to change my mind, which, of course, is a complete waste of time. You should never waste your time arguing with people who are clearly being paid to argue with you, to waste your time and tie you up and distract you from more profitable ways of getting the information out. So this brings us to the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who is the officially designated patsy for 9/11. It was all his fault, and we know it was his fault because he confessed after being waterboarded 180 times. Now, if you were waterboarded 180 times, you would probably confess to 9/11. You'd confess to shooting down the Hindenburg. You'd confess to assassinating John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln and personally nailing Jesus to the cross. And because that is the entire substance of the case against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, his trial is shrouded in secrecy, and it's becoming even more secret. It was being held in a military court on a military base. Now they want to remove it to a military base in another country and make it incredibly secret. So secret that even Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself, the defendant, the accused, is not going to be allowed. This is a show trial. Nobody's allowed to see even the accused. This has all the due process of a drone strike. So they'll come back in the corporate media and said, yes, we held a trial and we found him guilty, and that is what you will believe if you are a loyal American citizen. Now, loyalty does not mean loyalty to government lies. To be a loyal American is to be loyal to America and Americans, 330 plus million of them. The government is not the country, although it tries to sell you that idea that they're one and the same and you cannot love your country and hate the government, as Bill Clinton used to say. The government is not the country. The government is a temporary custodian hired by we the people to take care of the nation for our behalf. And there are rules on them, just like you would have rules on any other employee on how they are to conduct their job. And those rules are the Bill of Rights. Not just a good idea, it's the law. So being a loyal American doesn't mean believing the government's lies, especially when the lies are as obvious and pathetic as this chemical attack in Syria or 9/11 itself here. Now, earlier today, there was an interesting story about how a pro-Islamic hacker had gone public announcing he'd compromised every Twitter account in the world. And this hacktivist identified himself as Mauritania Attacker. Said he'd compromised all of the Twitter accounts in the name of Allah and blah, 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 blah. And Twitter, of course, did an immediate security check and found there was no compromise. The specific OAuth tokens that this guy claimed to have hacked were still secure. So this is just more of this gratuitous Muslims are evil propaganda that we see out there. Okay, yeah, for those of you listening on Bambuser TV, I'm not sure what's going on. We're not on Justin TV any longer. We're on Bambuser, and today it seems to be having a real serious problem, and what I'm going to do is during the next commercial break, I'm going to slow the bit rates, but we're getting lots of internet dropouts here on the island of Oahu, so it may not even be Bambuser, but I'm going to slow the transmission rate. Plus, it is a very popular show, and a lot of people are signing on, and even though Bambuser promises unlimited streams, obviously there's an upper limit on their physical hardware, so I'm going to drop the bit rates on the next commercial, and hopefully that will fix it. If anybody else has another suggestion for a video streaming service that won't interrupt my show with commercials, as Justin was doing, even though I was paying a monthly fee for commercial broadcast, commercial-free broadcast, let me know. I mean, I don't mind if they put up lower thirds or graphics or stuff like that, but a lot of people are complaining that Justin TV seemed to plant commercials in my programming anytime I talked about Israel. What an amazing coincidence not to be believed. So we'll try and deal with those technical issues on the upcoming segment here. Now, the blowback from the abduction, good word for it, of David Miranda at Heathrow Airport by the British authorities is continuing. And Glenn Greenwald and David Miranda are out there basically saying journalism is not a crime and it is not terrorism, which was the whole rationale for the British government to grab David Miranda and interrogate him for 9 hours, trying to browbeat him out of his passwords to his electronic devices so they could try and go in there and find information to get Glenn Greenwald. The management of The Guardian is now out there saying that obviously the government is trying to equate journalism with terrorism in order to impose draconian controls. And my comment to that is, welcome to our world, because that's what we've been dealing with here in the independent media for 20 years, ever since I started my blog, way, way, way back in 1994. I was being called terror supporter, terror lover, you're aiding our enemies, and I never was. I'm putting out the truth. And if the truth aids the enemies, that is the fault of a government that lies and wants to go online because they don't know any other way to control the nation other than lies, deceptions, and propaganda. Because they've been doing it for so many years, they don't know how to do anything else. And so now there are portions of the corporate media who are trying to do the real job of journalism. Now they're coming under attack, and all I can say is welcome to our world here. Apparently, was reported in Reuters where a U.S. government official has openly admitted that Great Britain's detention of David Miranda was done to send a message to Glenn Greenwald. We will cause harm to those you love if you don't shut up about the NSA scandal. That's real Gestapo tactics. That's not law enforcement. It's not anti-terror. It's not crime prevention or crime solving. It is outright thuggism. Stop telling the truth about the U.S. and U.K. governments or bad things will happen to you, like happened to Michael Hastings. And by the way, the corporate media today is going on and on about how the autopsy said the death was an accident, but he had traces of drugs in his system. So it had to be his fault. And you should not pay attention to all the witnesses who heard the car explode before it hit the tree. That's just nonsense to think that the U.S. would kill, reporters who were doing stories on the head of the CIA. What kind of a country do you think we live in? Well, we know what kind of a country we live in. That's why we're out here reporting these things. Now, the former Lord Chancellor of Great Britain has gone public to say that the detention of David Miranda at Heathrow Airport actually had no basis in British law. There was no foundation whatsoever, no legal basis for them to grab him and hold him for 9 hours to scream at him trying to get his passwords. They just went ahead and did it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And during the commercial break, we disconnected from Bambuser, and it wouldn't let me connect back in. I had to swing the dead cat a couple of times before it would finally connect. I'm now streaming at a lower bit rate, both on the audio and video, and it may not be as high a quality, but you may get more of it. Looking at the logs, it appears the connection between here in Oahu and Bambuser is being interrupted on a regular basis, which could be the fact that we live here in the United States of America in a technological backwater where the infrastructure is collapsing, or there may be some game playing going on out there because Bambuser isn't the only service that I'm having issues with. Earlier today, one of the advertising servers that we have at whatreallyhappened.com in order to finance our operation started locking up, and I had to disconnect them. So there may be all kinds of game playing going on the internet because it stands to reason if we're coming up on another false flag, like 9/11, either on Labor Day weekend or 9/11 itself, or just some other randomly chosen date to try and get the war machine going again, the government will try and shut off the independent media through means overt and covert. And remember, in the week before 9/11 happened, the FBI was going around the United States of America shutting down the websites of all Muslim charities to make sure they could not stand up and say, hey, don't assume Muslims had anything to do with it. Didn't want anybody out there challenging the official story while they catapulted the propaganda forward. At the moment, it looks like I've got a stable connection, and hopefully the people on the Bambuser feed are going to be seeing. Well, it's not like you got to see my face clearly. I mean, if you want to see my face clearly, go to the post office and look at my wanted posters. All right, so we're back here talking about the very heavy-handed Gestapo tactics being carried out by the British government against David Miranda and against the UK Guardian. And apparently sources have come out to say that David Cameron himself authorized the destruction of the UK Guardian's computer equipment on which was being kept one of the copies of the Snowden files. And I have to wonder, first of all, if David Cameron did not appreciate the public backlash that was going to happen from this stunt, and if he really thought that was the only existing copy of those files. Because common sense has to tell you, both for Edward Snowden himself and for the UK Guardian, that's not the only copy. There are multiple copies all over the globe. By now, I'm absolutely convinced that that's going to be the case here. Besides which, the stories about the NSA spying come out of the Guardian's New York office, and Glenn Greenwald himself works from Brazil. So what did David Cameron think they were going to do here other than to send a message to other newspapers? If you start reporting bad things, we'll come in and smash your office equipment. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil. We're going to grab a phone call here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brother Michael. You know, Michael, I wanted to say something really sensitive, not to you or anything, but, you know, you were talking back about the live war scandal and all these, the Enron and all these situations where these guys have totally corrupted the American people and middle class and a lot of that. You know, Michael, there is going to be a serious judgment day coming. And it's in Revelations of the Great White Throne. And these guys that are afflicting this Satanism even harder, for instance, we know who the Gestapo is above, but they are going to have severe punishment for eternity. And they might think that they can sneak by today and say, oh, we want to destroy so many people of the population. But I'll tell you something. They are not going to sneak by the real judgment day. So I just wanted to give you a little encouragement there, Mike. And you know what? Keep it up, brother. We'll keep praying that those lines stay open so you can keep speaking the truth against this evil thing that's surrounding us. So take care, brother. I love you. We'll talk to you later.
All right. I'll do my best to keep on going. And let's see. We're going to take one more phone call this segment. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Brother Mike. Hey, you're really getting the truth out there. I just want to reinforce what you were saying. I'm pretty sure you elucidated the fact that there was a joint Israeli-Mossad-CIA connection on 9/11 right into the Pentagon's Office of Special Planning or something like that?
Well, the Office of Special Planning was an office within the Pentagon that was compromised by the AIPAC spy scandal. And, of course, the public face of the scandal was that information was being leaked from the Office of Special Plans through these two guys at AIPAC and then to Israel. But the real scandal was that information, propaganda, including a lot of phony information about Saddam's nuclear weapons, came from Israel through AIPAC into that Office of Special Plans and from there to the White House, where it was used to justify the war policy. And but that is a separate operation from the people who did 9/11, who were obviously people inside the United States government, or otherwise the Secret Service would not have known that they could let Bush sit there reading about pet goats at that school in Florida. And, of course, Israel, because remember, those dancing Israelis who got arrested at 9/11, 3 of them turned out to be Mossad agents.
Yeah. And there was another 200 plus that were involved with some moving company, and they were arrested in these moving vans that had all this contraband, including high-tech explosives in it, you know? And
oh, yeah, it was a huge scandal. I mean, the FBI had stumbled on the largest foreign spy ring in U.S. history being run by Israel, and they found out because apparently text messages being sent to drug enforcement officers regarding drug raids against ecstasy dealers were finding their way into the hands of the ecstasy dealers so the dealers could avoid the raids and go on. And it involved Amdocs, which was an Israeli company that handled the billing for all of America's phone company, which gave them that metadata that the NSA is now taking directly electronically, and another company called Converse Infosys, which was an Israeli company that built in the wiretapping hardware in the modern phone system. In the old days, they'd have to go out with alligator clips and wires to tap a phone line. Today, the eavesdropping facility is built right into the hardware, and this Converse Infosys was the company that installed it, and presumably they had a back door left in it where they could use the system for Israeli intelligence along with U.S. law enforcement. And it's thought that this may have been the reason that Israel got hold of recordings of Bill Clinton with his phone sessions with Monica Lewinsky and applied pressure on Clinton to order the FBI to stop looking for Israel's top spy in the administration, codenamed Mega. Because the fact that Bill Clinton did order the FBI off that investigation, that's documented fact.
Amazing, Mike. And, you know, I wish there was some way. I'm going to do everything I can in my little sphere of influence. There ought to be a way to ban these Israeli, like Dov Zakheim, a dual Israeli citizen, a rabbi, can't account for $3 trillion in the Pentagon's coffers, you know, and then supposedly all the documents involved with that were destroyed with the Pentagon event.
Yeah, that's why that 757 flew that big circle around the Pentagon to come in from the other side, because it was being aimed at the offices where they were trying to find where that $3 trillion went. Boom, end of story. Whoever got that money is away with that free and clear. It's not unlike the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, which just conveniently happened to have all of the files and documents regarding the BATF and FBI raids on that church in Waco, Texas, in advance of congressional hearings. Boom, the building goes up. Oh, sorry, the files are gone. You know, there's no evidence about what happened, and the congressional hearings, of course, basically turned into a dog and pony show.
And, Mike, you know what happened? That guy, Terrence Leakey, a brave police officer in Oklahoma City, he wouldn't bow to the pressure to keep quiet about that it was an inside job, whatever, you know, all that.
Yep.
So they tortured him to death. And now K-9, you know, survivor cops were also threatened. They did the video, A Noble Lie, all about that, A Noble Lie. I wish you could interview Officer Browning sometime. Well,
I'll try and get him here the next time we're coming up on the anniversary of the Murrah building, but I want to stay focused on 9/11. Connie Chung, who used to be a major fixture in the TV corporate news, and I knew and worked with her way back years ago at Channel 2 in Los Angeles. And she was there in Oklahoma City, and she got word that the fire trucks had been deployed on the streets around the Murrah building before the explosion happened. And she asked the fire chief about that on the air, and 24 hours later she'd been fired. So that's the way it goes. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. It looks like our Bambuser stream is back up running uninterrupted, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking of I want to be a pirate, I cannot tell you how much this story is tickling me. According to the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, the IRS cannot provide licensing information for most of the software they are using. And so the Inspector General is saying the IRS may be violating copyright law on as much as 89% of their software. Another one of these government double standards. You must have licenses for all your software, but we're just going to copy and spread it all over the place here because we're the good guys. Now, for the people struggling to listen to my program on Bambuser, even though I lowered the bit streams on video and audio, apparently it is continuing to break up, and I apologize. Looking at the logs, apparently the connection is being disconnected on a regular basis. Now, whether that's Bambuser just not being able to do what they claim they're able to do, or whether somebody is trying to hack the stream, I really don't know. And because I'm talking here on the microphone, I really can't take the time to deal with it. I'm probably going to have to find yet another provider to get the TV version of this program out there, because I know that's a significant part of our audience, and I don't want to just cut it off there. All righty, getting back to the situation about the heavy-handed thuggery of the British government in detaining David Miranda and in going into the offices of the UK Guardian newspaper and physically destroying the computers on which they thought was a copy of the Edward Snowden leaked documents. The White House has come out sort of hemming and hawing and saying, well, you know, it's hard to imagine that we would do the same thing, which means they're considering doing the same thing. And then they came out with a statement saying the U.S. government wouldn't force reporters to destroy computers. Probably they'll just take them out with a drone strike, because that's what they're really good at doing. But obviously Spookdom is throwing a major tantrum that the jig is up. The whole world knows the U.S. government, in collusion with Britain, New Zealand, and all these other echelon group, are spying on law-abiding people all around the world. And there is no justification for it. There is no excuse. They're trying to come out there and saying, you know, we're looking for terrorists, and when you're looking for a needle in a haystack, you know, you've got to look through the haystack. Well, you know, adding more hay to the haystack does not help you find that needle. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. I guess Fred in Michigan called back. Fred, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, I don't mean to interfere with your flow. And now that you mention it, let's see, James Corbett, for sure, maybe James Bamford, and let's see, who else was it? This guy, Major General William Odom, Fixing Intelligence. There was somebody else. Oh, yeah, Mark Lane. Mark Lane, who authored the book The Last Word.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know Mark.
Well, Mark said, when I asked him in an interview on Coast to Coast, he said, because I said, hypothetically speaking, the only way that I can see that we're ever going to get rid of this government tyranny is to terminate the disinformation intelligence community. He said, you're right, we got to dismantle it entirely and reconstruct it.
I'm in agreement. You know, Obama's promises for tighter controls and greater transparency is just more USDA choice bovine excrement to try and lull Americans back to a false sense of privacy so they won't take steps to protect their business secrets from being pillaged. But the only way the American people will be certain that all of these abuses of the Constitution are over is for those data centers to be shut down, the computers sold off for surplus, the buildings turned into low-income housing, and the whole thing just torn down, because very obviously we've seen the NSA leadership waffle on this issue of ability versus authority.
And Mike, why are the Mormons?
Hang on. Let me finish this thought here. You know, very clearly the NSA has been exceeding its authority. And so if they will not obey authority and legal limits on their behavior, we have to take away their ability. And we can do it now at the grassroots level with personal encryption, keeping our really important private files on unpluggable devices that are not connected to the net, having get an old laptop, go over to the Goodwill and get an old laptop that doesn't have Wi-Fi built in, and just keep your important documents on that and move things back and forth on a flash drive. And at the grassroots level, we can start protecting ourselves from the NSA. They don't want you to know it's possible, but that's what we can do. But ultimately, the solution has to be to get rid of this unconstitutional entity in the middle of our government. Because, again, going back to the history of the FBI, the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, blackmailed the government to keep his job for life. He blackmailed politicians up to and including John F. Kennedy with his private secret files. And if J. Edgar Hoover did it, if the FBI did it, the NSA is doing it right here and now, which is why you have people like Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi out there saying, oh, yes, the NSA is fine. We should not be angry with them at all. Obviously, the NSA found their skeletons in the closet.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's got to be a way, Brother Mike. We got to, like you said, the grassroots, we got to move ahead also proactively. Somehow there's got to be a way to defund. Maybe there's some mechanism by which we can prosecute, at the grassroots level.
There's going to be no way to work within the system because we know the NSA is targeting members of Congress. They're targeting judges. Heck, they apparently, somebody got the goods on Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, because of that way that he did the about face on Obamacare. So there's no way to work within the system if the entire system has become a spookocracy.
Yeah. Hey, and before I forget, Brother Mike, the only reason I brought up a noble lie is because the canine cops who did it, including Browning, said, look, it's the same MO for all these false flag operations. So they did that video to describe the blueprint by which all these false flag events occur. And, they said they wanted everybody to see it and have everyone they know see it. And, if possible, get their congressmen to see it, senators, because, maybe the vampires
But again, you're operating from a worldview that members of Congress, if they were informed about what's going on, would take action, and they're not going to. Members of Congress already know what's going on. They know about the false flags. They know about the hoaxes. They are compromised by their campaign donors, by whatever dirt the NSA has on them, by whatever dirt Israel has on them. I'm sorry, we're out of the phase where it's possible to reform the system from within. I've been working towards that goal for almost 20 years now. And with very rare exceptions like Cynthia McKinney and Ron Paul, the people inside that system don't care about the rest of America. They are out for their own enrichment, their own privilege, their own power. They will go to their graves supporting that system of tyranny because they personally benefit from it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do whatever I can here at the county level where I'm at because I want a constitutional sheriff in the county. And who knows, maybe we can all protect ourselves at the county level. What do you think? Well,
I think, we're starting to see more and more counties and cities and even some states start to strain at the leash from Washington, D.C. And, again, going from the history of the collapse of the Soviet Union, when it happens, it's going to happen really, really fast. And we do need to be prepared to minimize the amount of confusion and turmoil that's going to result from that and just already be set to move forward. This is the nation we want next. Rule number 1, no private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest because that is a recipe for disaster. Even if it takes 100 years to happen, we cannot allow ourselves to condemn future generations of Americans to what we're going through today just for a bunch of ink and paper to make things feel like they're good right now. That was how America got suckered 100 years ago. We cannot ever allow that to happen again.
Thank you, brother.
All righty, thank you. Okay, obviously I'm still getting emails. Bambuser, for whatever reason, is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I'm going to have to start seeking yet another provider. A lot of people are recommending live stream. And we'll just go from that. I think the safe thing to do right now is if you're on Bambuser and you're not getting a good signal is just go over to republicbroadcasting.org and click that little button and listen to the audio on live stream because, let's be honest, this video picture isn't changing very much, and it's not really all that interesting. We'll be back after these words from Phyllis Schlafly and a couple of commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And looking at the logs for Bambuser, it seems that my stream is being disconnected on a regular basis, about every 4 minutes or so. And I have sent an email to their support to ask them what the heck is going on. And they keep nagging me to go pro, and it would cost me about $200 a month, which I don't have, to pay the fee. But if they're going to be disconnecting my stream every 4 minutes, then obviously I need to seek another more reliable provider. And again, probably at least for the duration of this show, if you're watching on Bambuser TV, you might want to switch over to Republic Broadcasting and pay attention and listen to the show over there, because there's nothing on the video but me gesturing. Here. Now, you're probably aware that the NSA sort of grudgingly admitted they were breaking their own rules about 2,000 times, so really it's not that big a deal. You shouldn't pay attention to it. And, of course, everybody is saying, yeah, we're paying attention to it. And, by the way, just exactly what rules do you have that you've been breaking? And so the NSA released a list of the rules that were being violated to journalists that was almost entirely blacked out and redacted. You can't know what the rules are. It's national security, but yes, we broke a few of them, and it's really just a few times, and you should go back to using your text messages and cell phones and laptops and tablets in the clear and take no steps to protect your privacy from the government, because we, the big government, love you, and we would never, ever, 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 ever do anything to harm you as long as you're obeying all the rules, which we know is false. Again, getting back to the Asia-Pacific Economic Conference in Seattle, U.S. intelligence agencies were caught red-handed stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to their cronies. So this is a government that provably cannot be trusted with your private data. And the fact that we have proven with our NSA challenges that the NSA can't actually find real criminals and real terrorists, it should be very, very obvious here that all this spying, it's all on you, the law-abiding citizen, to keep you in your place, to loot you of your creativity, of your work product. Apparently down in New Zealand, their prime minister was in a press conference, and all of a sudden he started getting asked questions about all this illegal spying and New Zealand's role in the echelon system. It was the great-grandfather of all this stuff. And apparently the more questions were asked, the angrier and angrier he got, with this look on his face like, how dare you ask me about that? We're here to talk about the fluffy issues. And he wound up literally having to walk out of the press conference, because the journalists are asking questions he cannot answer. No doubt the New Zealand government will be going into their newspapers and smashing computers now, as the global spook tantrum begins to escalate here. Now, over the last couple of months, we've been hearing about this ongoing legal battle in the court system over the authority by the police to track your cell phones without warrants. And it's gone back and forth. It's in the appeals court system, and apparently today yet another appeal court said that, yes, the cops can track your cell phone without a warrant. They can just sit there in their little command center, type in your phone number, and the map will show immediately where you are. That is none of their business under the Fourth Amendment. The courts are trying to say, well, really, you have no expectation of privacy when you're out there in public. Sure we do. Anybody who goes into an adult bookstore is operating on the presumption that nobody knows he's there except himself or herself and the store clerk. And as long as a crime is not being committed, the government has no business knowing where you are. Maybe you and your family are on a diet, and on your way home from work you decide to sneak into the bakery shop and get an eclair because you've been craving it all day, and you don't want your family to know about that. Why does the government need to know you're eating an eclair? And the answer is it doesn't, it shouldn't, it's a waste of taxpayer money for them to even find out. You should be furious about this. You do have a right to privacy. That's why that Fourth Amendment is in there. It was in there because the British government, when they ran this place, had a habit of simply opening the door and walking in and looking around to make sure you weren't doing something King George III might disapprove of. And the fact that they're not physically walking a person into your home is irrelevant to the idea that the government cannot come into your private space and just poke around looking for things that they might not like. By the way, do you remember we've been talking about these shooting drills conducted at schools, which are billed as terror drills and training sessions, except they're not, because the students and the teachers are not told ahead of time, we're going to have a drill, and when you hear the shots going off, you should proceed in an orderly fashion, and this is how you'll get to safety. These are exercises in which these actors playing terrorists simply storm the school, fire off a whole bunch of blank ammunition, and just reduce the children to absolute tears, to intimidate them, to condition them to react in fear to uniforms and guns. So who's behind this? It turns out the Department of Homeland Security is signing the checks on these. Just like they were signing the checks on the George Zimmerman protest trying to create race riots. $140,000 so far has been detected as coming from the Department of Homeland Security to these groups who are running these terror operations in the schools. And that's what they're doing. They're terrorizing the children. They're terrorizing the teachers. Why are they doing that? Well, they can't find any real terrorists. All they've got are these phonies like Adam Gadon or Yusuf al-Khattab or Amzi al-Amrika that are completely concocted out of thin air to wag at you to support this war against the Muslim agenda. In the year 2012, by the U.S. government's own figures, no American inside the United States of America died as the result of an act of terror. You are far more likely to be killed accidentally by the police. You are far more likely to be killed accidentally by your doctor or your pharmacist. And the propaganda is always, oh, terror, 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 terror. Pay no attention to those bad pharmaceuticals. Pay no attention to the epidemic of sloppy medical mistakes. The police are there to love you, and if they shoot you by accident, really, they meant well. But be afraid of the terrorists, and if you're not afraid enough of the terrorists, we'll manufacture some for you so that you feel like you've been in a terror attack, even though it's a staged theatrical exercise. And the Department of Homeland Security is apparently funding all this stuff. Now, Bradley Manning was finally sentenced in his case for leaking government secrets. He got 35 years. I would like to see a future president grant him an immediate pardon, because Bradley Manning did not leak secrets related to our weapon systems or anything militarily useful, the way Jonathan Pollard stole our nuclear deterrence secrets and gave them to Israel, gave them to Russia. What he leaked was evidence of U.S. war crimes and atrocities. The brutality going on in Abu Ghraib, helicopter gunships just mowing down innocent civilians, including a press crew, from the air. That's what Bradley Manning leaked. He blew the whistle on U.S. war crimes, and that's why they went after him. They're trying to send a warning to everybody in the military who's being ordered to commit war crimes. They're being told, you go out and you do what we tell you to do. And if you tell anybody about it, we'll just slap you down hard. That's what it is. The U.S. government is reduced to terrorizing their own military to keep their dirty little secrets. Meanwhile, the people who carried out that torture that he blew the whistle on, the people who carried out those war crimes that he blew the whistle on, they're still walking around free. Nobody went to prison for gunning down that press crew from a helicopter. Nobody went to prison for the torture of Abu Ghraib. Only Bradley Manning paid the price. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I hope you can hear me, because now the feed from RBN coming out from Texas to Oahu is starting to deteriorate. For those of you still trying to listen on Bambuser, I'm getting emails from people saying they're having strange internet behavior. And again, if the U.S. government is going to try a new false flag attack to get the war going again, they're obviously going to be working on some way to try and shut off the independent media and the blogs so that no voices can stand up to challenge the official story. And the fact that we're seeing problems on so many different systems at the same time is starting to suggest the possibility that somebody somewhere is starting to play games. So we need to keep an eye on that here. Now, interesting story came over Fox News during the last commercial break about how the FISA court has just released some new documents in which they're basically now trying to duck the blame for the NSA spy scandal by saying they were lied to about the purpose and volume of the information that the NSA was asking them to authorize. So they're already pointing fingers back and forth over who's going to catch the flack from this. Now, you need to understand something very fundamental here. The Foreign Intelligence Service Act, which created the Foreign Intelligence Service Act Court, is limited in its jurisdiction. The word foreign tells you that because of that Fourth Amendment, they do not actually have authority to conduct spying on Americans inside the United States of America. But they sort of glossed that over and said, oh, the FISA court says we can listen into your phone calls and find out when you're over at the bakery having an eclair or over at the adult bookstore looking at whatever you look at over there. The legal authority does not exist for the FISA court to authorize spying on Americans inside Americans, unless and until they are in communication with a foreign person suspected of being a terrorist. That is the limited context. Now FISA is out there saying, oh, NSA lied to us. We're not to blame. We don't have any control over them. They misrepresented to us. So it's completely out of control. And the good news is they're pointing fingers back and forth. They're not going to go along with a clear narrative of this is what we did and why we did it and it's perfectly legal and you should shut up. Now everybody, the blame-shifting regatta is underway and they're jockeying for positions along the ley lines. Now here's an interesting new development. This is coming out of Judicial Watch, which over the years has done amazing, amazing work at exposing government corruption and fraud. And now, basically, they have gone to court regarding the White House claim that they refused to release any of the photos and videos from the operation in Abbottabad where we are told Osama bin Laden was killed, even though we all know the real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes in December of 2001, and every Osama since then has been a fake. If for no other reason than the fact that the hair got darker and darker and he looked healthier and healthier, even though he was already on dialysis in 2001. And so Judicial Watch is going to court saying that the public's right to know exactly what happened in this operation outweighs the White House's stated concern that they don't want to release any photos of the dead Osama bin Laden out of fear that it will offend and enrage Muslims and increase the terror threat, which is rather absurd for a government that is sending drones in to blow Muslims to bloody bits, which is certainly going to annoy them. Nobody can have a drone from the United States fly overhead and drop white-hot flaming death on their children and remain entirely cheerful. That's just human nature. Now, the real issue, of course, is, was that Osama bin Laden who was killed in Abbottabad on May 1st, 2011? And the answer is no, it wasn't. There is considerable evidence, including one report on Fox News that was then retracted, and statements by Benazir Bhutto shortly before her assassination, that bin Laden was dead. And he died in 2001. It was reported in the foreign press. His funeral was reported in the foreign press. So whoever it was they whacked in May 1st, 2011 wasn't him. And remember that flood of phony photos that was poured onto the internet to say, we got bin Laden, and they were all clumsy, clumsy fakes. Because apparently so few people want to work for the government any longer, they can't attract quality talent anymore. So they put out these amateurish photos claiming to be the dead bin Laden. They were quickly exposed. The source frames used to create them were quickly found. And that's why the White House doesn't want to release anything more, because it's not really bin Laden. And they can't say that. We're not going to give you any more pictures because you're going to expose those as fakes. Oh, no, we're going to withhold all these things because we don't want to offend the Muslim people, even as we're invading their countries. It's a pathetic excuse. And it's along the same lines of the excuse the White House used regarding the crime scene photos of Vincent Foster, because there were multiple reports of a second gunshot wound on the body, which would undermine the suicide claim. And the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for those crime scene photos went all the way to the United States Supreme Court and lost on the flimsy claim that dead people have a right to privacy. And the right to privacy is considered one of the exceptions to the Freedom of Information Act. We can't give you information if it violates some citizen's privacy, even if they're dead. So, congratulations to Judicial Watch. You will lose this case because what you're on the verge of exposing is something the White House dares not allow to be exposed. But congratulations for trying and having the courage to try. Now, the U.S. government is now moaning and wringing their hands and crying that they're having problems finding pilots for those drones to drop white-hot flaming death on children around the world. It's easy work. Sit in a very nice air-conditioned control room somewhere in the United States, play this little video game joystick, take out the little white blobby things, get well paid, go home. And the official story is there's a shortage in the number of pilots able to operate the drones. Okay? I doubt it has anything to do with ability. Now, the X-Plane Flight Simulator, which is in many ways superior to and certainly a lot easier to use than Microsoft Flight Simulator, has a Predator among its simulations. There's a Predator for the Microsoft Flight Simulator as well, but I was on X-Plane, and I selected the Predator just to check it out, see how it flies, how the aerodynamics, and basically I'd caught a segment of the movie The A-Team, where they send Predators to shoot down this tank that's dangling on a parachute. And I wanted to see if the Predator could actually maneuver as it's shown in film and TV, and it can't. It can't. These are not high-performance aircraft. They are built for endurance and range, not for air combat maneuvering. The only difficulty is that there is a latency imposed by the satellite link between when you move the control and you see the result of moving the control on your screen, which is not unlike flying a helicopter, where you move the cyclic and the rotor has to move before you get a result. But that's easy to deal with. I think the problem that the government is dealing with is finding people who are comfortable mentally with the idea of sitting in this control room, dropping white-hot flaming death on innocent people on the other side of the globe. I think that's the problem. We got to take a break for commercials. Back with a phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you for accepting the call. Mike, I just want to make a statement and get your comments in regard to judicial watch. Another issue is Bin Laden's wives. You can't get within 500 miles to interview any of his wives, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, when they invaded the compound, his wives weren't there. So that's my comment, okay?
Well, I obviously, you know, like they're taking Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and they're going to hold their little kangaroo court someplace on the other side of the planet. The U.S. government doesn't want anybody talking to actual witnesses. That's why even though we've got about half the people being held in Guantanamo have been cleared for release, they succeeded in proving they were not a terror threat to the United States, and the U.S. government still will not release them because their bodies bear scars from worse things than waterboarding that was done to them to try and secure confessions. And so the government's trying to keep this all hidden away. Now, in the case of the supposed wives of this bin Laden, one of the faked photos that we exposed here at whatreallyhappened.com was a picture of this, one of the wives' identification to say, see, this was really one of bin Laden's wives, but obviously they couldn't show identification from prior to 2001. And they faked it, and the fake was done so bad. I mean, I used to teach visual effects and animation out at the University of Hawaii. And if one of my students had handed in a project this badly done, I would have flunked them. But, I mean, it was that obvious and heavy-handed what they were trying to do. And I guess they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for talent over there at the propaganda office. Yeah, it's a major embarrassment for the United States. They're just so used to lies and deceptions, and in an age where the lifespan of a government deception can be clocked with an egg timer, they don't know what to do. Common sense would say that somebody would say as a policy, okay, this stuff doesn't work anymore. This Cold War propaganda, hoaxes, and stunts doesn't work any longer. We are in an age where it is impossible for corporations and governments to lie to the public the way they used to do it, and we got to change the way that we deal with the population. We have to be more truthful. We have to base our decisions on facts and science, not political agenda-driven wishful thinking. And they could actually still turn this country around by doing that, by getting them and saying, yeah, you're right, we lied about Kennedy's assassination, lied about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, lied about Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, but you know, those were other people who are long dead and gone. And we will set as policy right now that this government is going to be truthful with the American people, and we understand it's going to take years to regain the trust of the American people, but we're going to start doing it today by telling you the truth about what's going on. And it will take 10 years or more for the government to rebuild the trust of the American people. But it has to start today with an end to all of these obvious, heavy-handed, bogus lies is really what it comes down to. All right, Dan, anything else? Okay, we're going to switch over to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to talk about Bradley Manning and his sentencing of 35 years. First of all, I'm very disappointed in my country for doing that. And what I think it exposes, it's facts don't matter to people. It's branding, and it's how information is presented. You know, he's presented as being a traitor and aiding the enemy, and the fact of the matter is he did the right thing. And there's very few people in this world who would stick their neck out like that. And the fact that he's been villainized and portrayed as some sort of subversive or what have you, and then it just makes me sick that people don't care what the information is. It only matters how it's presented. It's like Coke or Pepsi or whatever. It's just a matter of, you know, if you put smiling
well,
faces
I have another question that needs to be asked here. I mean, when Julian Assange set up WikiLeaks and it was being promoted in Time and Newsweek as the go-to place for leakers, even before WikiLeaks had ever actually leaked anything of substance, they were getting the cover of Time and Newsweek, while blogs that had been, you know, given material by leakers like WhatReallyHappened.com had been around for 10 years at the time. And I have to ask, why didn't WikiLeaks and Julian Assange protect this guy, protect his anonymity? And, you know, it was WikiLeaks set up to draw in a major leaker so the government could make an example out of him. Now, I don't know the circumstances under which Bradley Manning's name was made public, but certainly if I have somebody who's going to leak something to me and that's not an invitation because I don't want to deal with the stuff, but the first advice I would have to say is you protect your identity. We're not going to put names. We're not going to put any identifiers. In fact, I remember years ago following TWA 800, I had information leaked to me that I could not use because the source would be easily identifiable from the content of the leak. And I basically shredded it because I'm not going to place people at risk like that. And so I'm asking, what was Julian Assange thinking when he didn't advise Bradley Manning? You're going to be in a lot of trouble with this stuff. Let's keep your identity hidden.
Well, Webster Topley did a great expose on Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and there's a lot of ties to, you know, covert operations and organizations that have government ties to it. So I absolutely think you're correct. I think that WikiLeaks is a false front. It's a way to send a chilling effect to anybody who would want to leak. And the whole story about how the information got leaked on a CD, and it was something like, I think, 1,200 pages and videos, and it could never actually fit onto a recordable CD. The whole story is completely bunk, but the fact of the matter is, the information that came out was still relevant, and it was still good, and it was still needed to be made public.
Oh, yeah, it needed to be made public, but again, and I am one of those people who does think that, you know, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks was being promoted and hyped as the place to go if you had something to leak in order to prevent leaks coming to websites that were going to get it out there without control and protect the anonymity of the leakers, and Bradley Manning got burned by WikiLeaks.
And WikiLeaks has put out a lot of things that support the establishment. They put out a lot of things about WMDs in Iraq. They put a lot of things about 9/11. They put out a lot of things about global warming.
And WikiLeaks never ever puts out anything that makes Israel look bad. Another thing to keep in mind.
I think one thing, I'm pretty fuzzy on the subject, but in part of this expose by Tarpley, he does a whole thing with Julian Assange's hair as it being that sort of platinum blonde color, and that was part of not a cult, but a religious organization that has heavy ties to government of Israel, nonetheless. So like WikiLeaks, I I don't buy them being a genuine article by any means whatsoever.
No, I don't. And again, what made it obvious to me that this was some kind of a controlled propaganda trap for leakers, again, 3 months after Julian Assange registered the domain WikiLeaks, he's on the cover of Time and Newsweek, even though at that point nothing of real substance had come through there. He was being sold and promoted. If you have something to leak about the government, this is where you go. And again, other blogs, including my own, that had been doing this stuff for 10, 12, 15 years, were still, to this very day, were ignored and marginalized by the corporate media. That may change now that the corporate media is starting to feel the wrath of an oppressive government when they try and do their jobs. But again, WikiLeaks and Assange were being promoted. They were being sold by the corporate media. And Manning fell into the trap, and now he's paid the price for it.
Just to, wrap up, I'll let you go. What angers me, back to my original point, it's the story isn't about the information. The story isn't about what important information came out and needed to be made public. The story is about who Bradley Manning is and how he is portrayed to the public and how the government is portrayed counter to him. That's where the focus is on. That's what people seem to draw conclusions from. And that is the biggest crime of all, because it doesn't matter who he is. It doesn't matter what he did. What is important is the information. And 20 years ago...
That's exactly right. And it was information about U.S. war crimes, torturing Iraqi prisoners to death to find nuclear weapons that never existed, these U.S. military helicopters just gunning down innocent civilians at random. These are all war crimes. That's what Bradley Manning put out there, and it should have been put out there. But I think he walked into a trap by going to WikiLeaks.
20 years, absolutely. And 20 years ago, this man has been hailed as one of the greatest Americans of the 21st century, and it's just a shame that he's doing 35 years now.
Well, I got to tell you, if I succeed in my Rivero 2016 presidential campaign, Bradley Manning gets a presidential pardon along with Mumia Al-Jabbar and Leonard Peltier. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And I know we have a caller on the line, but because we changed our Skype connection, I lost the caller and his location. So whoever you are, anonymous. Oh, it's Kyle in Pennsylvania. Kyle, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind? Kyle, are you there? You are. My goodness, we're having problems all over the system today.
It's close by. It's Canton, West Virginia. So
Canton, West Virginia. Okay.
Yeah.
So
anyway, I won't confuse you anymore. Yeah, you were talking about WikiLeaks and the fact that he never discloses anything about Israel.
Yes.
I have about 2 years ago, you know Ann Wright, I guess, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
And about 2 years ago, she was interviewed on Radio Exterior de España, the Spanish shortwave service.
Yes.
And they did a big, long, good interview with her. And she said at the time, on that interview, she wanted to find out what the cables were for Israel. She was interested in what they would... When the further disclosures came out, what she could find out. And about a year ago, she was on, or maybe less than a year ago, she was on the Power Hour with Joyce, and I actually called and asked her and reminded her about that. And I said, did you find out anything, or do you think, like, Israel has they get special treatment, like, and their cables aren't mixed in with everybody else. They're of a higher classification. And she said they're of a higher classification. And she said that they were using a lot of experimental weapons on the Palestinians, this sort of thing. So that could be why there's never any stuff on the Israelis, because it just goes in a different route than the other normal, ordinary, common folks,
Well, it doesn't matter what route it goes in. If somebody leaks the information, then it should be available. I mean, nobody is saying WikiLeaks is actually breaking into lines of communication. WikiLeaks supposedly is getting information leaked to it. And I think the reason they allowed Bradley Manning's information at least partly out was to build WikiLeaks' credibility that they were the go-to place for leakers. They couldn't very well have promoted him as the go-to place for leakers, and then the first time a big leak comes in, they shut it down. But we do know there were other cases where Julian Assange did just that. They made a big announcement ahead of time that they had all kinds of hard evidence of financial Wall Street malfeasance, specifically regarding Bank of America, and they were going to announce it in 4 weeks. 4 weeks came and went, and we were told that somebody working for WikiLeaks had walked out the door with that one particular hard drive, and the information was gone. Which basically tells me that WikiLeaks, at least in part, is probably running an extortion racket. Because otherwise, why would you announce in 4 weeks' time I'm going to release information that's going to lead to the arrest of executives at this or that organization? It's to give them 4 weeks to contact you and make an offer to silence the information, which appears to be what happened with this Bank of America information. If you are in possession of leaked information while you have it on your person and it's not being made public, you are a target. Just ask Michael Hastings about that. And so if WikiLeaks was genuinely about getting leaks out there to the public, the instant this information came in, it would go out the door. But that's not the way Julian Assange plays it. He basically announces ahead of time, we're going to release something really damning against these people, and then it winds up not happening, which tells me that somebody somewhere met Julian Assange's price. I think he's a fake from top to bottom. I mean, he's a convicted computer criminal.
I've heard the people say that like he's more secretive than the government, so he's sort of on an ego sort of trip himself. I think so. Oh,
you think?
Yeah, and another thing about regarding this releasing of this information about the overthrow of Mossadegh, don't you think that's kind of curious that it happens right now as with the overthrow of Morsi and in Egypt and the release or the pending release of Mubarak, and I'm thinking it's either the CIA looking at that and said, okay, look, we've done it again, or maybe coming out and said, oh, we learned our lesson, we'd never do it again. But the parallels between the two, even with the release of Mubarak and probably the reinstatement of Mubarak or Mubarak Jr. as the Shah. The Shah was the son, the prince, and he was reinstated back on the peacock throne. So, I mean, I thought that the timing of that was just incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on here. And again, the fact that Mubarak was released from prison, I'm starting to wonder if the actual agenda from Israel is to put him back in control of Egypt, not so much just as getting Egypt back under Israeli control, but to prove to other Israel puppets around the world, don't worry, if there's a revolution in your country, we will make sure it's put down and reversed and get you back into your job. And that's what I think may be behind this, because for the new incoming government to alienate the support of the Egyptian people by releasing Mubarak, that's something that they would not do unless they intended to do something with Mubarak himself. If they wanted Mubarak out, they could just send a message saying, be patient. As soon as this is all over, we'll quietly release you. But to order his release while the conflict is still going on, my gut is telling me they're actually going to announce they're putting him back into power.
Oh, yeah. All those 2 years of all this joy and happiness and all those tens of thousands of people dead are just going to say, well, back to normal, that's all. Let's forget about all that.
Back to normal for the benefit of the United States, back to normal for the benefit of Israel, back to normal for the benefit of private central banking, and the Egyptian people get driven right back down to the poverty and hardship they were experiencing before.
That's right. Good. That's the way they like it.
All righty. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you get on out of here. We're coming up on the top of the hour. Interesting story coming out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Police over in Britain are finally admitting that government spooks aren't the only threat to your privacy. And they're acknowledging that hundreds of victims have been hacked by private investigators working for large corporations, and nobody's been arrested. Apparently in Great Britain, it is legal for a corporation you are speaking out against, like a Monsanto, to hire private detectives to investigate you and harass you and try and find something they can blackmail you with. And apparently, under British law, that's perfectly okay. Apparently, a member of Parliament is saying that this is, again, just the tip of a gigantic iceberg. And when your nation sinks into fascism, where government power is aligned with corporate financial power, they start blending into each other. The government acts like a for-profit corporation, and for-profit corporations start acting like they're the government. And we are seeing that both in Great Britain and here in the United States of America here. Another story coming out of Strat Risks. Apparently not satisfied with being in control of the emergency broadcasting system in this country, the United States Special Operations Command, ooh, there's a very fuzzy term for you, wants the ability and the authority to take control of all AM and FM radio transmissions in the case of a national emergency. They want to be able to flip a switch and every broadcast transmitter in the country is instantly feeding you the government's propaganda. Might be a good time to invest in a shortwave radio. Get one with single sideband because those amateurs are very often carrying the breaking news that the government doesn't want you to hear. If you go over to Republic Broadcasting, they have a nice little online store there, and they've got some really good products in there, and they do have a really nice shortwave radio. And if you are a prepper, you should have one, if not one and a spare. So it's something for you to be considering. When we come back in our third hour, we're going to be talking about the economy. Bad news all over the place there, and apparently Greece is going to need a whole new bailout. Ooh, our surprise. We thought the last one was just going to make everything okay as long as the Greek government agreed to fire all those public workers and just end all those social services was going to make it all work. Remember we talked about how that spreadsheet that modeled the effects of austerity turned out to have a flaw? Because all those public workers that the government let go did not have private sector jobs to go to. And here we are. Exactly what I told you was going to happen. Greece needs another bailout or they'll collapse. We'll be right back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And I know we got a caller waiting on the line. I'm going to get to you here in a minute, but I wanted to call attention to a couple of things. Over the break, I was looking at the Internet traffic report. And there do seem to be a lot of backbone servers down on the American mainland right now. One in Anaheim, one in Canada and Vancouver, two in Georgia, one in Michigan, one in New Jersey, one in Ohio, one in Pennsylvania, one in Texas, one in Virginia, one in Washington. Now, if this is just simply the fact that neglected infrastructure is starting to collapse, maybe. But a lot of people have been writing in saying they're having problems with Internet connectivity. The Internet traffic report is saying there's no packet loss yet, but obviously the system is having to work around all these offline servers. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we go to the phone call, I'm looking at the U.S. stock market. It just closed, and very interesting, was sort of ticking along in the red, and about 2 hours before the close, all of a sudden a huge surge of volume hit the market and was just driving it up and up and up, and it peaked and then immediately went right back down. Looks like at the closing bell there was a huge amount of sell-off activity, and the Dow ended 105 down. This is going to make investors nervous. After what we saw last week, everybody's still waiting to see if the Federal Reserve is going to be printing up more instantly created out of thin air money to pour all over Wall Street. But the problem with that, of course, is we're coming up on that G20, whose main agenda is going to be, is it time to move away from the dollar as the global trade and reserve currency, which will absolutely implode the American financial system, which out of decades of laziness has simply grown dependent on gaming the economy of the rest of the world for their own profit, which has gotten us into this mess. Okay, back to the phones. Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Phyllis Schiller report always makes me want to throw up a little bit, just to let you know that to start out with. But the 1984 book by George Orwell, it's so reminiscent of what we're doing, what our government's doing today. They have these. I recall the main character basically went to the government and said, "I want to be an agent of the government." And they said, "Well, you may have to die, you may have to be disfigured, you may have to endure all kinds of stuff that is treacherous, and you really want to." The guy asked him, the government official, "Are you sure you want to work with the government?" And he said, "Yes, I want to." And basically, it reminds me of all of our ambassadors during 9/11 that were basically going overseas trying to find out if any governments were trying to prosecute us on war crimes.
Well, it wasn't that they were trying to find out. The Bush administration intentionally sought treaties with other nations that would exempt American officials from being arrested and sent to The Hague. And at the time, this is before 9/11 even happened, a lot of people, including yours truly, were asking if the U.S. government is going to such lengths and spending this much political capital to try and get these treaties to protect American officials from war crimes trials, it's because they're getting ready to commit some war crimes.
That's right. And I just wanted to make a point that our educational curriculum has been rigged for decades already. It's not a new Obama thing, whatever that core.
The Common Core. Well, the Common Core is just the newest incarnation of No Child Left Behind. But again, many years ago, I taught a year of remedial math at the high school level in Southern California, and I was just absolutely appalled at the attitude toward education coming out of the administration. I got along great with the other teachers. The students all loved me. But the administration was all about, just ignore those bright students. They're troublemakers anyway, and put all the effort on the real dullards trying to catch up. And, I got disgusted with it. And fortunately, when I was over here at UH, I had a much more positive experience. And, if there'd actually been some decent pay involved, I probably would have stayed there. But I reached a point where I was trying to teach and trying to work on Lost, and I had to make a choice, and I went over and continued on with Lost. And there are still times when I miss it. I really enjoyed being a teacher. I very much did so. Anything else, Alex?
Well, that's great. And I just want to let you know I really enjoy your show. And also a lot of the religious organizations, they're shills for the government, too. So it's like, do I want my kids to go to some Christian organization to keep Christians in school together? I'm a Christian, but I think that the Christian denominations are probably the worst organizations for the agenda of secret spying and all that of any organization around.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, during World War II, a lot of espionage was actually run out of churches. Because they were protected by that aura of being connected with God and so forth. Same thing that they're doing with all the child molesters today. And that's the reason they get these tax breaks, because the government relies on the churches as part of the control mechanism to keep you believing that no matter what is going on around you in your country, that if you just go to church on Sunday and throw your spare change in the plate and get on your knees and clasp your hands together and pray to the imaginary playmate in the sky, that things will get better. But, of course, they never do. And that, don't stand up against the rulers. Don't worry. When you're dead, you're going to go to heaven and have wings and a harp. And all those people who oppressed you and stole your wealth and sent your kids off to die in war, they're going to go down to the dark place with devils and pitchforks and stuff. And this fairy tale does keep a huge chunk of the population under control. I mean, Israel has just exploited that whole end times myth. To build this unquestioning support for Israel among the so-called Christian Zionists who are just ready for Israel to set fire to planet Earth because they think Jesus is going to come down after it's all over and invite them up to the big house. And that's why these religious institutions get these tax breaks, because they are part of the system of control. Now then, getting back to news about the economy. As I mentioned before the break, Greece is already needing a new bailout. Germany is getting very unhappy and upset about that, because very clearly this policy of austerity and bailouts is not working, other than to funnel more of the wealth of the people into the pockets of the private central bank, which is what the agenda for the private central bank has always been. You work, make money, give it to us. That's their system of government. Now, a lot of people are still talking about this meeting that Obama called yesterday, coming back from his vacation, with the heads of major U.S. government financial institutions, including members from the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the CFTC, the SEC, and the Federal Housing Finance Agency. And we don't know what they were talking about, but the scale of the meeting did ring some alarm bells, and probably Obama was in there saying, how do we make the dollar look good ahead of the G20? And what he might have been told by all these people is they're out of tricks. There are no more rabbits to pull out of that Wall Street hat to make the economy look good ahead of the G20. And it may be that Obama came out of that meeting thinking that the whole economic system is going to crash and he's going to get the blame for it, even though he didn't cause it. He merely exacerbated it. And maybe that's why we're seeing this lame chemical weapon attack in Damascus to try and get the wars going again, because historically, nothing distracts Americans away from a banker-induced financial crash than a world war. They've done it twice before. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, I've lost count of how many nations the United States has invaded already. Their solution to this current self-created financial disaster is, let's get a bloody war going so the American people will forget all about the crime and corruption. They'll salute the flag, they'll throw their babies onto the designated bayonets, and all will be well. Except that it's not going to work, because America isn't the nation it was in 1907 or 1929. We're not a manufacturing powerhouse. We don't have the money and the manpower to prevail in conventional wars. We still got the nukes, still got those. But the people of the world are more sophisticated and understand this is what's going on behind the political speeches and the headlines. War to solve the bankers' calamity. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And did we already take Alex in Florida? I forget. We already did. Okay, so we're talking about the economy. We're talking about the strange behavior of the stock market today. We're talking about Obama's meeting yesterday with the heads of Federal Reserve, FDIC, CFTC, and so forth. I think they're scrambling to keep this whole fraud going a little bit longer. Because if there is a major downturn between now and the G20, that is going to embolden people at the G20 to say, yeah, it's time to let the dollar go. No more international demand for the dollar, no more petrodollar. And that may be a good reason for the U.S. to just crank up the war into rock and roll, full tilt boogie overdrive here. Apparently the United Parcel Service is going to drop 15,000 spouses from their insurance because of Obamacare. So, again, the workers are being hit hard. And here's a good example. This story came up from Wake Up From Your Slumber, and was carried in a couple of different places. But apparently, we've been talking about the abuses of the intern system, where these kids will go to college, they'll go into debt to get a college education on the promise they're going to get high-paying jobs when they graduate. And when they graduate, there are no jobs. There are internships, which are unpaid. My nephew went through this, graduated valedictorian of his college, couldn't find a job for over a year. So anyway, there's this story. Apparently, this intern was ordered to work for 72 hours straight without a break. Fell over dead. Internships are the new slavery. Yes, you have a college degree, and yes, you have a sterling record, but you must come in and work for us for free for 6 months before we even consider actually paying you a minimum wage. And those interns do get abused. And it's expected they're going to work these very, very long hours. And apparently this particular intern was working in a financial center involving financial manipulations, where the traders who are making huge amounts of money and figure they're going to retire by age 30 anyway, they're working till 3 a.m., 4 a.m., just raking in the money because they're addicted. And this guy was basically ordered to work 72 hours straight. And he died. Now, talking about the decline of the economy here and the decline of the nation, this is a very, very sad story, especially for me. NASA is now trying to sell the last of the Apollo space shuttle hardware. And they are putting up for sale these giant crawler transporters. They're about the size of a baseball diamond. They were built during Apollo to carry the Saturn V Apollo from the vehicle assembly building out to the launch pads. And then later on they were used to transport the shuttles from the VAB to the launch pads. Well, America doesn't have a manned space program any longer. In fact, President Obama is the first president to preside over a United States without a manned space program since Eisenhower. And it looks like this government has no intention of ever launching another space program because they're selling off the hardware. They're trying to find private space venture companies to take over the facilities, which is difficult because they haven't been maintained properly. And so now they're getting ready to try and find somebody to buy and operate these crawler transporters in case private space ventures want to use the facilities. And if they can't do that, they're going to sell them for the scrap value. They're just going to throw them away. And it's a real tragedy. And I understand they're old, but it's just a reminder that America has lost its ability to do the things it used to do, like go to the moon, or even get our own astronauts up to the space station. And I'll tell you, this is a personal note, and if anybody is out there from like the Kansas City Cosmodrome or the Smithsonian or anything like this, I'm going to share a little idea with you. Over there at Cape Kennedy, off in their little scrap yard where the older hardware is simply dumped, is the original Apollo White Room. And what I mean by that is it's the little steel room at the end of the arm that was cozied up to the Apollo command module, through which the astronauts would walk and be put into the command module prior to launch. And all of the Apollo moon missions went through that. And it's just sitting in a field there, corroding away. Now, its scrap value isn't all that great. Isn't there somebody out there who would recover this particular piece of hardware, clean it up, and make it as part of an exhibit of when America really was able to do these things before? You could put it into your little museum where people could literally walk through that structure getting in and out of an Apollo exhibit. They could literally walk in the footsteps of our moon astronauts. Anyway, now that I've waxed nostalgic about the days when NASA was great. And by the way, NASA isn't great anymore. I mean, they're out there towing the line on global warming and everything, and they're trying to keep their reputation up with stunts, cheap PR stunts like the Wave at Saturn Day. That's what NASA is reduced to, where they organized a day where everybody on Earth was going to wave at Saturn while Cassini was taking a picture of planet Earth from out there by Saturn. And, of course, the picture of Earth is just this little tiny dot. You can't actually see anybody waving. And so they had everybody take pictures of themselves waving at Saturn, and they assembled them into a collage, and it's up at NASA's website. And NASA seems to think that this is going to remind everybody of what a great institution NASA used to be. And personally, speaking from experience, I don't think NASA has been great since the days of the old NASA, when the scientists and the engineers were in charge and calling the shots and things got done. And when new NASA came along, it was the beginning of the end, and now we're at the end. And I'm very saddened to see it happen. And I feel very much like that character on The Newsroom on HBO, where he's talking to that college audience, and he says, we're not a great nation anymore. And he goes down a list of all the reasons why we're not the greatest nation on earth. And the one that he omits and should have included is that America is a nation that can't do what it used to do. Can't make the best products on Earth. Can't fly into orbit. Can't fly to the moon. I know a lot of people are still very upset over the failure of the Kepler Space Telescope, which was specifically designed to look for planets around other stars, and it's already failed. And you contrast that with some of the missions that happened, well, back when I was there at NASA, like Voyager, that is still working out there. It's already going into interstellar space. It's still working. It's still sending data back to Earth. I remember when we were working on Viking, and it was estimated, it was expected, the Viking landers were only going to survive long enough to maybe take 250 pictures because of what had befallen the earlier Russian soft landing on Mars, where it touched down, operated for 12 seconds, and then quit. And those Vikings were built so well, they just kept going and going and going, and there was a scramble to rewrite the computer code to catalog and index all those images. Because originally, they'd simply put a single 8-bit integer to encode the image number, which would get you up to 256. And all of a sudden, we had hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pictures, and we're having to go back and rewrite and rework the code to deal with all of that. It was a huge wealth of information. So I'm sorry to see that NASA's having a garage sale or a vehicle assembly building sale, and it's very, very sad. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with more about the economy. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're wrapping up on the economy. An article I'm looking at over an Investment Watch blog, 33 shocking facts which show how badly the economy has tanked since Obama became president. Now, I have a comment to make here. Long-term readers and listeners know that I am no friend of Obama. He was the lesser of two evils. I think John McCain and Mitt Romney would have been even worse than Obama, but I'm no friend of Obama. But he inherited much of this situation. The tax incentives that encouraged corporations to move high-paying jobs to other countries were created under his predecessor, George W. Bush. Now, Obama does have to accept the blame for not reversing that policy. In fact, according to research conducted by the Hackett Group, this tendency to incentivize with the tax policy the offshoring of American jobs accelerated under Obama. So he's clearly made things worse, but he doesn't eat the entire blame for it. And I want to be cautious about this because we're already starting to hear more and more talk about, oh, we've got to impeach Obama, which in the coming years might actually gain some traction here. But you need to understand something. Impeaching and removing Obama will not change the basic nature of the government and financial system. They may scapegoat him, dump all the blame on him, and then kick him out to try and convince America things are going to get better. But it wouldn't really make a difference. The president is just a figurehead representing a hidden power structure. And that power structure, if they feel it would suit their own interests, they'll dump Obama and put Biden in. Now, Obama is a politician, and like any other politician, when something bad happens, it's somebody else's fault or God's will, and when something good happens, he takes credit for it. And he's trying to take credit for the very positive-looking job numbers, even though we know they're completely fraudulent. But the bottom line is the ills that affect this country are systemic. It's not just Barack Obama. It's not just the House. It's not just the Senate. It's not just the Republicans. It's not just the Democrats. It's not just the NSA. It's not just the CIA. It's not just the IRS. It's not just the Federal Reserve. It is the totality of the system, which has turned into a cancer on the nation that, like any other cancer, grows without control, without restriction, and simply grabs the resources it needs to live and grow without regard to how it's harming the system as a whole. So we're just going to have to stay patient. It's edging close to collapse. If the G20 says the dollar is no longer the global reserve currency, the party is definitely going to be over. Our goal as people of the United States of America is to be prepared to weather and survive the turmoil that is going to follow the collapse of the Federal Reserve System and the federal government, and to be prepared to decide for ourselves what the next nation shall be. Because there'll be no end of banker-supported carpetbaggers running around saying, I got a brand new government for you right here. Just sign your name on this paper. We'll take care of you, and we're just going to restart the same scam all over again. And following the collapse of the current system, when it's done thrashing around on the floor, hopefully without triggering a nuclear war in the process here, anybody who comes along who dares suggest we restart private central banking issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, we grab that miscreant, we tar and feather him, hang, draw, quarter him, burn him, and have the ashes peed on by a rabid dog. Because we must learn the lesson of the last 100 years of our own history. We cannot allow the same scam to be started up again, or we condemn future generations of Americans to the horror and turmoil and difficulty that we're going through right now. This government because it relies on a banking system that by design creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt, is now buried in debt, and we don't even really know how big it is. The government says it's only $16 trillion in debt. Other economists are saying when you look at all the off-budget items like Social Security, it's $74 trillion. NPR had a report it's over $200 trillion. And you need to be careful about that off-budget designation for things like Social Security, because those are obligations that are supposed to be funded through independent channels. If you look at your little paycheck, there's a separate little box where they take money out of your paycheck to put in the Social Security Trust Fund to be invested, to generate a return, to fund your retirement, except that the federal government has been looting that money to balance its budget, especially during the Clinton administration. That's where Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus. He literally embezzled the retirement money of the American people. They called it a loan, loaning to the government, because the government is credit worthy. And what they did is they took that cash buildup that was in Social Security for the baby boomer retirements, they put it in the general ledger, and they spent it as general funds, and what they put back into Social Security were Treasury bonds. Except that there's already a Treasury bond bubble. That may also be one of the things they were talking about at the White House yesterday. There are not enough living Americans, especially at our current depressed wages and salaries, to ever make good on all those Treasury bonds out there. Other countries and banks have stopped buying U.S. Treasury bonds. They're trying to dump them. China's trying to reduce its exposure to U.S. debt. That's why the Federal Reserve is just creating all this new instant money, and, you know, they now have $2 trillion of the government's debt on their books. And their solution is always going to be, all right, we got to take more away from the American people. We've got to harvest the wealth of the American people to pay off all these debts. It isn't out here. There isn't enough wealth in the hands of the American people to even begin to pay off all this artificially created debt that exists only on a ledger. That money that we're being told the government owes doesn't exist and never did. It's accumulated interest over the last 100 years. This government could decide to declare martial law, strip us of everything we own, leave us naked, starving in the streets, take all of our possessions, our homes, our cars, our jewelry, everything, and it still would not be enough to pay the debt off. That is why this system is doomed. Going to go to the phones here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I just posted a link to your site. It was on Daily Pulse about Russia. So he goes, what do you know about Russia? How much you've been propagandized? And because, I don't know, you see all these shows and they show like evil Russian spies, even Russian military. And yet everybody, you know, when you read this piece, it just says, why you hate Russia? And, you know, and the only thing the writer can think of is Pussy Riot or something like that.
Yeah, no, all that concocted stuff here. Well, yeah, I saw your article and I did promote it to the main page. Here's the deal. Okay, first of all, there are factions within the United States government, particularly the military, who want to have a new Cold War with Russia, because that meant amazing amounts of money taken from the American people to put into all these weapons R&D programs, and of course, huge parts of that go into the pockets of the military-industrial complex. There's another faction that is very concerned because Russia's economy is really taking off. And one of the reasons it's really taking off is when Putin came into power, he kicked out the money junkies, sent them all back to Israel. And they took government control of their central bank. It still has its private owners who still own it, but it's under Russian government control to make sure the public currency is treated as a public utility. The same system that made America great up until the money junkies started with their first and second banks of the United States and then the Federal Reserve. And that is why Russia is now on the special high-interest targets list, because they dare operate their country without a private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. How dare they do that? Same reason they went after Saddam, same reason they went after Gaddafi. Trying to impose this scam on the world by force of military arms, American military arms. And as soon as Putin did that, as soon as he exerted government control over their central bank, that's when the propaganda cranked up. There was that whole Pussy Riot situation, which was blown way out of proportion, and more recently they're trying to say, oh, they're oppressing the gays, they're pounding on the gays. All Russia did was pass a law saying that homosexuality should not be taught or propagandized in the public schools to our underage school kids. And that is a law that is echoed in many, many nations around the world and some states here in the United States. They're not rounding up the gays and putting them in concentration camps the way the Nazis did, although that's certainly what they're trying to imply. Putin is not telling gays to stop being gays. He's simply saying, keep it away from the kids. Let them grow up and make their own choices. And I agree with that. Going to take a break for our last commercial break. We'll be right back. George, do you have anything else to say?
Well, I will stay on the line. Just one more thing.
All right, stay on the line. We'll get right back to you. America, welcome back to the show. George, you had one more idea you wanted to give us.
Yes, I know when this system collapses, you know, there's going to be everybody's going to realize what it means to say there's no honor amongst thieves, because I have a feeling these money junkies will steal from each other, and if they get arrested, they're going to rat each other out.
Oh yeah, there'll be a scramble for the lifeboats. I mean, I think we're already in the stage of U.S. history where the financial players and people in government know they can't stop the coming collapse, and now they're just trying to grab what they can and put it in their own pocket before they skedaddle off to the Cayman Islands or something. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation, and I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, I was just saying, you guys see no honor amongst thieves. Like I say, if they get arrested, they're going to rat each other out and turn each other in.
Well, they're only going to rat each other out if we, the people, are able to catch a bunch of them and convene a revolutionary tribunal in order to make some examples of them to send a message to future politicians. No, you will not do business as usual. All righty, George, going to let you go. We're almost to the end of the show, and I got a couple of things I got to cover here real quick. We've been talking about stinky badges, and we got a couple more stories here. Apparently, this is an interesting story out of Phoenix. Apparently, there was a guy up on a roof. They weren't sure if he was considering suicide, which was kind of hard. It was only a two-story building, or he was just having a drug trip or something. So the police show up to try and get him down for his own safety, and they start by tasering him a couple of times until they could drag him off the roof. As soon as they have him off the roof, they put him in a chokehold for something like 3 minutes. Then they handcuff him and drag him down a set of concrete stairs by his handcuffed arms behind his body, meaning his head is going bang, 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 down the concrete steps. No big surprise, he's dead. Now I'm sure the police officers on the scene are saying, hey, look, this is a good thing. If he had killed himself, he would not be allowed into heaven. But because we, the Phoenix police, showed up and brutally murdered him, he gets to go to heaven when he's dead. So we really actually did a good thing. Apparently over in Missouri, the police beat up some peaceful protesters with impeach Obama signs. Little First Amendment issue there, I think. Another story coming out of Pennsylvania. Woman at a township meeting was recording the meeting with the iPad camera. Now, this is covered under Pennsylvania's Sunshine Act, specifically Section 711, saying that if you are attending a meeting of the government, you may record it. So a policeman shows up, says she's breaking the law, takes her iPad, will not return it, will not give her a receipt for her property, which is the only proof you have. When the police take something from you, you demand a receipt to have the chain of evidence. This used to be mine. The police now have it. Now, apparently the woman and several other bystanders confronted the police officer outside the township building over the Sunshine Act, and he threatened them with arrest if they didn't leave. And in his own words, he says to the crowd, the iPad is mine for the time being. And then they wonder why the police are no longer respected by the American people. The police have become the enemy of the people. By the way, for every 100,000 Americans, 760 are in prison. That is 5 times the rate of incarceration in Britain. And because they're not spending money on building larger prisons, the prisons are overcrowded, which is leading to situations like we're seeing in California, where 4, 5, and 6 prisoners are being kept in a cell originally designed for 2. We have 8 times the incarceration rate of Germany, South Korea, 12 times the rate of incarceration in Japan. That was one of the comments the guy from Newsroom was saying on there. America leads the world in only 3 areas. Percentage incarceration rate of our citizens, the number of people who believe angels are real, and military spending, in which we outspend the next 26 nations combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now then, we know that prison factories or prison-based businesses are now big business here in the United States of America. A lot of call centers are being manned by these prison labor companies. So if you're getting a service call and you're not getting an Indian accent, you're probably talking to somebody who's in jail here in the United States manning the phone banks. And it turns out there's a major problem with this because a lot of these guys are in jail for burglary. And they're being contracted by insurance companies to call people's homes and say, we would like to sell you insurance. What valuables do you want to insure? And then when they go off duty, they call their burglary buddies outside the prison and say, hey, go to this address. They've got this, they got gold, they got cameras, they got this, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Good thinking. Good thinking there. Now, over at INFOWARS, they've got a very interesting video. We linked it to whatreallyhappened.com. Gun confiscation begins in California. And the video is basically about how the state of California, which does not have money to go out and deal with things like meth labs, does have ample funding for these vans full of operatives in body armor and machine guns to go around and take guns away from citizens. And they're talking about armed prohibited persons. APP is the acronym. And the idea is under California's new law, they can suspend your Second Amendment rights and confiscate your guns for a wide variety of reasons. Any felony conviction can have your gun rights suspended. By the way, in California, it's a felony to allow balloons to float up from a beach for some strange, bizarre reason. If you've had a domestic dispute, you get into a fight with your significant other, even if it's nonviolent, and that gets reported to the police, they can come and take your guns. They interview this guy named Joe Menendez, who says, I had a rental property, I had a guy running a meth lab there, I couldn't get rid of him, called the cops, cops said, we have no money for drug enforcement, I know how he feels, but I got plenty of cash to grab the guns. They're just trying to find ways to take guns away from the American people. They're starting to wave around mental illness. I mean, they acknowledge the problem with mass shootings are these SSRIs. If you go into a lot of states and you fill out the paperwork to buy a gun, it says, are you taking prescription antidepressants? And if you answer yes, no, you're not getting a gun. But the propaganda is still, the guns are bad. The guns are bad. We got to get rid of the guns. Funny, when it's a mass bombing, they blame the bomber. When it's a mass shooting, oh, it's the gun's fault. And it's... apparently, in California's law, misdemeanor convictions are sufficient to have your guns taken. They're just looking for any excuse. They're trying to have a blanket declaration that all returning veterans from the war zone are suffering post-traumatic stress syndrome, and on that basis, they're not allowed to own guns. They're trying to start the gun grab covertly, quietly, so you don't notice it's going on. Well, we noticed. By the way, there's a big push now for RFID technology in what are called smart guns. Now, the original idea, this was actually developed for the police force so that police officers would wear a ring that carried their identification so that when they pulled the gun and fired it, the gun would work. And if somebody else took the gun away from the officer and tried to use it, the trigger wouldn't operate, which sounds like a really good idea. But we already know how Apple Computer is seeking a patent to have a system in all future iPhones and iPads where the police can flip a button in their patrol car and all the cameras in the area stop working. So it is inevitable that this coming generation of RFID-enabled smart guns will have the same system built in, where if the police are going to go in and break up a peaceful protest in front of the banks, they flip a switch so that nobody who has a gun is able to use it. Nobody who has a camera is able to use it. That is a complete violation of the Second Amendment. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A government-operated remote control on your gun is infringement. They're getting serious out there. I mean, we can just smell the panic coming out of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. They know they have lost the trust and faith of the American people, and there's no easy way to get it back. But they don't want to give up all that wealth and power. And we see a banking system and a federal government that very clearly is preparing to declare war on the 50 states and on the American people, and you need to be prepared to deal with that. I hear the music. It's time for us to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Don't forget, we're going to have Dr. Kevin Barrett as our third-hour guest talking about the Million Muslim March on 9/11. Please make a point of going over to Republic Trading Group. Get yourself some physical silver and gold. As long as the bankers are trying to keep that price down, take advantage of it. And every purchase you make through RTG is going to help Republic Broadcasting, and we need every bit of your assistance that we can get. It is that desperate. We're in a fight for the future of the Republic. You need to get involved. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.